I stormed out of Andrew's parents' house, my heart pounding in my chest. The words his family had just spoken to me echoed in my mind, sharper than any physical blow. You're not part of the family yet. 5 years of being with Andrew. 5 years of living together, and I was still nothing more than a stranger to them. I had tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just the way things were, that their coldness was part of their personality, but tonight had shattered that fragile illusion. As I got into my car, I could feel my hands shaking. My mind raced. How had I allowed myself to stay in this place for so long? Why had I allowed myself to be treated like this? I drove aimlessly, not knowing where I was headed, but knowing I couldn't stay there. I had begged Andrew to see it, begged him to defend me, to stand up for me, but instead, his reaction had been worse than I could have imagined. He hadn't just stood by and let his family push me aside. He had agreed with them. The silence between us was unbearable. I couldn't go back to that. I wouldn't. Andrew and I had been dating for over 5 years. We had built a life together, discussing everything from finances to marriage, navigating through the mundane and the meaningful. Living together for 4 years, we had talked about everything, planned our future, and everything seemed perfect. We were both in our 30s. We were mature. We had talked about the things that mattered. We were supposed to be on the same page, but something had always been off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way he avoided certain conversations, or how, no matter how many family events I attended, I always felt like a guest, never really part of their world. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew I would never feel like I belonged there. His family had this tradition that I had always accepted, an annual week-long vacation. It was always just family. His parents, his sister, him, and no one else. No boyfriends, no girlfriends. And I got it, in the beginning. Family traditions are important. But as the years went by, I started to wonder why, after 5 years together, I was still not considered family. Every year, Andrew seemed to light up at the thought of this trip. He would talk about the memories they'd make, the bonding that would happen. And every year, I would smile and support him, not wanting to make a fuss. But a small voice inside me whispered, why wasn't I included? I tried to rationalize it, convinced myself it was just a family thing. Maybe they needed their space, their time to reconnect without distractions. But something didn't feel right. I had known Andrew for too long, shared too much of my life with him. Why was I still on the outside? I knew what was coming. I had suspected it for years, but I never allowed myself to believe it. How could I, after everything we had been through, still be an outsider in Andrew's life? The truth was, it wasn't just his family that kept me at arm's length. It was him, too. In some deep, unspoken way, he had allowed this to happen. He had never stood up for me, never fought for me when it mattered most. I had always been the one to adjust, to accept things as they were. I thought if I just kept loving him, things would change. But they never did. And that night, in his parents' house, when I had asked, so casually, so innocently, if I could, join them on their family vacation, it was the tipping point. His father had looked at me with a cool indifference, the same coldness I had grown used to over the years, and said, "It's just a family thing." His words were so casual, as though my feelings didn't even matter. The rest of the family had chimed in without hesitation. I wasn't part of the family. Not yet, anyway. What hurt the most wasn't the rejection. It was Andrew's response. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell his family that I was part of his life, that I was important. Instead, he simply agreed with them, looking at me like I was in the wrong for even asking. The tension that had been building inside me was becoming unbearable, I couldn't get over the fact that after 5 years, Andrew's family still didn't accept me. They always had an excuse. We're just not as close to you as we are with our own, or we're old-fashioned. But as the years passed, these excuses wore thin. I had become more than just a girlfriend. I was a permanent part of Andrew's life. So why did it feel like I was constantly being treated like an outsider? Why was I still on the periphery of their world, looking in, while they continued to circle around me, indifferent? What bothered me most was how easily Andrew seemed to dismiss it. At first, I thought it was just the nature of his family. They were distant, private people. But the more I tried to integrate, the more I realized that the problem wasn't just with them. It was with Andrew, too. He didn't seem to care about the fact that I was left out. His indifference toward their coldness started to make me question him. Was he complicit in this? Or was I simply not as important to him as I had hoped? My growing frustration wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about Andrew's ex, Rachel. Her presence at every family gathering was starting to gnaw at me. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe they were just old friends, and their families had known each other for years. But when Rachel and her family started showing up at birthdays, holidays, and even random weekends, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Andrew seemed entirely unfazed by it all. They acted as though there was nothing unusual about their continued interaction. I had never been comfortable with the situation, but I convinced myself I was just being insecure. Now, I was starting to wonder if there was more to it. As time went on, I began to realize that something was off. Was I just a placeholder in Andrew's life? Was I merely there to fill in the space while he held on to some distant memory of Rachel? The more I thought about it, the more I feared that I was not his priority, that his connection with Rachel had never truly ended. Why else would her family still be so involved in his life, even after all these years? Why was I excluded from their family vacation, while she was still clearly a part of their world? The question kept eating at me. Was there something I wasn't seeing? I wish I could say that I confronted him then, but instead, I sat with these suspicions, twisting in my mind, trying to piece together the puzzle. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed answers. And sometimes, the only way to get them is to go looking. One evening, when Andrew left his phone unattended on the counter, I found myself standing there, staring at it. I knew it wasn't right, but I also knew I couldn't move forward without knowing the truth. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I felt like I had no other choice. I unlocked the phone, and what I found made my blood run cold. I went straight to his family's group chat, and there it was, right in front of me, a string of messages that revealed everything. There was the usual chatter about the upcoming vacation, but then there were messages from Rachel. They weren't just discussing the vacation, though. They were talking about plans to meet up. And they had been talking for a while. The ease with which they communicated, the familiarity in their words, it was like nothing had changed between them. They weren't just family friends anymore. They were something more. But the most shocking discovery came when I found the vacation itinerary. There were 5 rooms booked. 1 for Andrew, 1 for his sister, 1 for his parents, 1 for Rachel and her parents, and 1 for me? No. My name was nowhere on the list. I wasn't invited. Rachel and her family were going, but I was not. The reality hit me hard. This wasn't just a family tradition. It was a betrayal. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had always feared this moment, but seeing it in black and white was a different kind of pain. It was no longer about feeling like an outsider. I was being replaced. Rachel, his ex, the one person I had feared all along, was back in the picture. And I was on the outside looking in. I knew I had to confront Andrew, but I couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. The pain of betrayal was too fresh. The truth was too much to process in one sitting. Instead, I decided to wait, to let him think everything was normal. I wanted to see if he would come clean on his own. I wanted him to admit to what I already knew, but deep down, I knew I couldn't face him without knowing everything. The truth was out, but I needed him to say it. I needed him to admit what had been going on behind my back. The silence between us grew. I didn't know how to act around him anymore. But inside, the walls were slowly closing in, and all I could think about was the betrayal. The pain of realizing that the person I had trusted the most was a part of this secret world tore me apart. But I was determined to figure it out. The moment I confronted Andrew, I knew things were about to spiral. My heart was racing as I stood there, face to face with him, knowing that the truth I had uncovered would finally come to light. He had no idea that I knew about the vacation, about his secret conversations with Rachel. I had to know why I was still being treated like an outsider after all these years. "Andrew," I started, my voice calm but with a sharp edge that I couldn't hide. "Why wasn't I invited to the family trip?" He paused, clearly caught off guard by my directness. But he quickly recovered and tried to brush it off. "It's just family time," he said, like it was no big deal. I couldn't believe how easily he dismissed it. "Just family time?" I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, like a storm ready to erupt. This wasn't just a vacation. This was about me, about my place in his life, and his family's blatant disregard for me. "You've been with me for 5 years, and I'm still not family," I pushed. "How is that possible? Why is Rachel's family still a part of every family event? Why do they get to be there while I'm kept at arm's length?" Andrew's face reddened, and he shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting me to challenge him so openly. His defensiveness made everything worse. "It's just a tradition," he muttered, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. He was stalling, avoiding the truth, and the more he tried to downplay it, the more suspicious I became. Then, he said something that hit me like a slap in the face. "You shouldn't make a scene," he said, as though my feelings were something to be dismissed. "It's not a big deal. Just let it go." My anger erupted. How dare he minimize what I was feeling? This wasn't just about a vacation. This was about being constantly pushed aside, about never being good enough for his family, about feeling like I didn't belong. I couldn't take it anymore. "Just let it go?" I snapped, my voice shaking with fury. "I've been more than patient with you and your family, and you're still treating me like a stranger. You've never once stood up for me, Andrew. You've always let them push me to the side, and now you're telling me to let it go." He tried to defend himself, but I wasn't listening anymore. The frustration had built up over years, and now, in this moment, it all came pouring out. When I pressed him further, he gave me an answer I wasn't prepared for. "My family is overprotective," he said, avoiding eye contact. "They don't want partners around. It's just how they are." Then came the line that pushed me over the edge. "It's not like the relationships with your sister's boyfriends, you know, those come and go." I froze. Did he just compare me to his sister's flings? After everything we had been through, after 5 years of commitment, I was nothing more than one of his sister's short-term boyfriends? I couldn't believe it. I had spent half a decade with this man, and he was still comparing me to fleeting relationships that didn't mean anything. Without another word, I stormed out of the house. I needed to leave before I said something I would regret, before the heartbreak completely consumed me. Andrew didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching me go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the realization gnawing at me from the inside out. Andrew was still emotionally tied to Rachel. His family was more loyal to her than to me, and it wasn't just the vacation. It was everything. They had been using me as a placeholder, just filling the space while they waited for Rachel to come back into the picture. It was a painful truth, and one that I couldn't ignore any longer. I wasn't his priority. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, but a newfound clarity. I wasn't going to let myself be treated like this anymore. I couldn't keep begging for respect and acknowledgement from a man who was willing to stand by and watch his family push me aside. I packed my things quietly, not wanting to make a scene, but knowing that this was the only way. If I stayed, I would only continue to feel invisible. It was time for me to walk away, to take back my self-worth. I was done. This chapter of my life was over. The days after I packed up and left the apartment were a blur of raw emotion, but there was a strange sense of liberation that began to take over. Andrew was away on his family trip when I made my move. I didn't bother to tell him where I was going. I couldn't bear the thought of dragging out an already broken conversation. Instead, I texted him, telling him I was going on a work trip. His response was barely a flicker of acknowledgement, an empty, "Hope you have a good time," followed by the silence I had grown so accustomed to. I didn't care. In that moment, I was free. I had already mentally checked out of the relationship. The love I thought I had for him felt like a distant memory, a fleeting feeling that no longer held any weight. The truth was, I had been carrying the emotional burden of that relationship alone for so long. Now, it was time to let go. I moved into a temporary place, a small, quiet apartment that gave me the solitude I needed to think. The emotional fallout was heavy, but there was an underlying sense of empowerment I couldn't ignore. I was free from the constant manipulation, the disconnection, the feeling that I was always secondary to his family and his ex. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could breathe. But as the days went by, a part of me felt the weight of the financial commitment I had made in the relationship. Money I had spent on vacations, dinners, gifts, and rent. I had always contributed, always been there, financially and emotionally. Now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a relationship that had drained me. It wasn't just emotional investment anymore. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine. While I was away, the idea of making Andrew pay for everything lingered in my mind. I wasn't sure what I expected. Perhaps an apology, an acknowledgement of the emotional and financial toll. But instead, I realized I had to do this for me. So, I began writing a detailed list of everything I had spent over the years. Gifts, vacations, rent, utilities, everything. It was painful to look at, but it felt necessary. Once it was all laid out, I sent it to him. The total was staggering, and I demanded that he pay me back for every penny. When Andrew tried to reach out, I ignored him. His calls, his texts, they didn't matter anymore. I had heard all his excuses before, and I wasn't interested in hearing more. He had shown me who he was, the man who prioritized his family and his ex over me, the woman who had stood by his side for half a decade. Now it was time to stand up for myself. I didn't need his explanations or apologies. I was finally done. Andrew had gone on his family trip, and I was left with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I didn't need to be part of his world anymore. I didn't care about the vacation, didn't care if he was trying to enjoy his family time. I was going to enjoy my life, without any of the baggage that had been dragging me down. I booked myself a luxury vacation, using the money I had demanded from him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was finally spending money on myself, the way I had always deserved to. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was in control. The moment I stepped onto the plane to my tropical destination, I realized that this was my new beginning. I didn't need Andrew or his manipulative family. I didn't need to play the role they had assigned me. But as I lay on the beach, feeling the sun on my skin and the cool ocean breeze, a small part of me couldn't help but feel guilty. Had I gone too far with the demand for money? Was I letting the hurt take over, instead of simply walking away with dignity? But then I reminded myself. I wasn't doing this to hurt him. I was doing this because I had finally found the strength to stand up for myself. I had been the one who gave, who loved, who stayed. Now I was reclaiming what was mine, and that felt like victory. When I returned from my trip, the weight of everything that had happened still hung over me. The freedom I felt was undeniable, but so was the lingering pain of betrayal. I knew that the time had come to make the final break, but I couldn't avoid what was inevitable: the confrontation. Andrew showed up at my office unannounced a few days after I returned, his presence immediately filling the room with attention I hadn't expected. He looked different, worn out, like he hadn't slept or eaten properly since I left. His eyes were pleading, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. But I wasn't interested in his apologies anymore. I'd heard those before. I knew what he was going to say, but I couldn't stop him from speaking. "Please," he said, his voice strained. "Can we talk? I know you're angry, but I need to explain." I looked at him, my emotions as cold as stone. I had given him years of patience, years of understanding, and he had used that as a shield to hide his true feelings. Now, I wasn't going to let him use my time or my heart any longer. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and let him speak, knowing full well that nothing he said could change what had already happened. Andrew started explaining how his family had pressured him to reconsider his relationship with Rachel, how they thought I wasn't the right one for him, how everything had been so complicated. He claimed that his distance, his coldness, his inability to commit, it was all because of the pressure they had placed on him. It was the same story he had been telling himself for years. The same excuses. It wasn't his fault. It was the family's fault. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I had been the one sidelined, the one who had given up everything for someone who never truly saw me. It was never just his family. It was him too. As I looked at him, listening to his words, I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a version of myself I no longer recognized. He went on to confess something that nearly broke me all over again. During the family trip, he had kissed Rachel. He insisted it hadn't meant anything. It was just a way for him to clear his head. His words felt like a slap, a cruel attempt to rewrite history. He was trying to convince me that nothing had really happened, that his feelings for Rachel had faded, that it was all a misunderstanding. But I saw through him. I saw the truth I had been denying for far too long. He was still emotionally attached to her. His family's manipulation had only made it easier for him to go back to her, to find comfort in the past. "You can't keep pretending this didn't mean anything, Andrew," I said quietly, the pain making my voice steady. "You're still in love with her, and you've been lying to both of us." His face flushed, and for a moment, I saw the cracks in his facade. But it was too late. The final truth had been revealed. He wasn't mine anymore. I stood up, my decision clear. No more second chances. No more hoping that things could change. I was done. The relationship I had given everything to had never truly been mine. "I can't go back to this, Andrew," I said, my voice firm. "You've already shown me who you are, and I'm not going to stand by and let you break me any longer." I walked out of the office, my heart heavy, but my steps steady. I knew the hardest part was still to come, but I couldn't allow myself to stay in a place where I was invisible, where I was secondary to his past and his family's control in the whelm. Days that followed, I reached out to Andrew's sister's boyfriend. He had no idea what had been happening, and I felt an obligation to warn him. I didn't want him to fall into the same traps I had. It was my last act of kindness, my last attempt to protect someone from the dysfunction of their family. And then, I let go. As I reflect now, I realize how much I have learned from this painful chapter of my life. It taught me the importance of trusting my instincts, of standing up for myself, and of walking away when I'm not valued. For the first time, I'm truly free. I don't need the approval of anyone else to know my worth. I will no longer settle for less than what I deserve. I've learned that life is too short to stay in toxic relationships. From now on, I will make sure to only let people into my life who truly see and appreciate me for who I am. And I will never again let someone dim my light for the sake of their comfort.